and welcome, dear friends, to this 19th year of the Turner Winter Series. I'm Maureen Raveno. I offer this welcome on behalf of Greg Peterson, the founder and perennial host of the Turner Winter Series these many years. We welcome with delight those of you who are with us today in the comfort of the Kappa Theater here in the Robert H. Jackson Center, as well as those who are enjoying this program virtually. It is my great pleasure to begin our program with a brief introduction of our guest, Kristan McMahon, after which I will turn the conversation over to Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. Kristan McMahon has served as president here at the Robert H. Jackson Center since April of 2019. She is a former principal with Vetted Solutions, an executive search firm specializing in association and nonprofit recruiting and consulting in Washington, D.C., where she helped guide and transformed a process for the company's executive searches. Previously, Kristan was corporate counsel for Verizon in Arlington, Virginia, where she advised all business entities on a variety of antitrust issues, including deal analysis and compliance with antitrust/competition laws. Before joining Verizon, she served as staff attorney for Howry, LLP, where she was part of the antitrust team leading government investigations and litigations for numerous global Fortune 500 companies. Kristan received a BA in journalism, mass communication, and political science from St. Bonaventure University, a JD from the Catholic University of America, Columbia School of Law, as well as a certificate from its Communications Law Institute. She currently serves as trustee and chair of Franciscan Mission Committee for St. Bonaventure University, where she previously chaired the Student Affairs Committee. She also serves as secretary and governance chair on the board of Youth for Understanding, an international student exchange organization, as well as a board member of Sitar Arts Center, a youth arts education center in Washington, D.C. This is just a brief snapshot of who Kristan is. And so it is now my great pleasure to welcome Kristan McMahon in conversation with Greg Peterson.
Welcome, Kristan. But before we get started, this past weekend I was deep in the Ed Tomasini archives and found something I had not seen before, but I was part of. So I thought I'd share a little nugget which involved both you and me, because I think it'll set the stage for this conversation.
All right.
So with that, we'll look at the TV monitor. I'm Greg Peterson. I am an attorney in Jamestown, New York, one of the co-founders of the Robert H. Jackson Center. Well, we've been pleased to, as a result of a pretty thorough search, to obtain the services of Kristan McMahon. Kristan is an attorney. She's been involved in the not-for-profit community. Graduated from St. Bonaventure University, which is a well-respected university hereby, and has come in with a great deal of vision. She led the board through its very active strategic planning process, which we're now finding fruit from that process. And so she's very focused on taking the Jackson Center in for the next 5, 10, and 20 years.
I'm Kristan McMahon. I'm the new president of the Robert H. Jackson Center. It's been a very exciting first 6 months, and I really feel as if I've gotten to see a little bit of everything that the Jackson Center does. So I want to make sure that the Jackson Center remains a local landmark, a local place of learning, but I also want to make sure that our message and the work that we do here gets out beyond Jamestown.
So this was a production by Brian Hill.
Yes.
From another distinguished college called Allegheny.
I guess we could talk about that one too.
And that there's a 9-minute version of it. It's wonderful. If I had seen it, I'd forgotten it. And you cover a lot of territory. Yeah. This was after about 6 months into your project here at the Jackson Center. And the question that really jumps out when I even look at your biography based on our little view there was that you were a former principal with Vetted Solution, an executive search firm specializing in association and not-for-profit recruiting and consulting in Washington, D.C., where you helped guide a transformational process for companies' executive searches. If you were looking as a client for Robert H. Jackson Center in 2019, based on what you now know, and how would you have advised them to look for the executive?
Oh, well, so one of my roles there was to write position profiles. And that is something that really both sells the organization, but also gives a clear outline of all of the requirements of the position, or at least the unicorn that people are searching for, whether or not you actually meet all of those requirements. And I think for the Jackson Center, I might have, and this didn't exist for the search, but I think I would have showcased their long history. It was almost 20 years at that point. The amazing work that they do in Jamestown, the wonderful partnerships they've had locally, nationally, internationally, and that they were really on a precipice of growth.
So that would have been, would you created a job description which might be different than what you currently have?
No, actually, I think it would be, we chuckle often at the other duties as assigned, or, I'm the chief bat catcher here as well, which at least twice a year I find a bat that needs to exit the building. Some of those captures are a little more exciting than others, but in general, I think that every day I wake up excited to come to work because every day is a little bit different, and helping an organization grow, helping them hopefully exceed what they had dreamed for themselves is exceptionally rewarding and something that energizes me.
Also energy-wise, graduate of St. Bonaventure University.
Mm-hmm. Go Bonnies.
Go Bonnies. And that's a Franciscan institution. And has that, the teachings there, though, you've got fathers, you got monks, you got everything Franciscan related. How is that education, the four-year education at that type of institution affected how you might look at the Robert Jackson Center and its mission?
Yeah, I think that the Franciscan mission is quite formative for me. It is an intention to do good in the world. It is an openness and accepting of all peoples and their ideas, and really tries to foster that conversation, not necessarily to come to agreement, but to come to at least some sort of understanding, because that's really the only way we can move forward. I know compromise has come to be a dirty word in politics, but that's really the best way to get things done when you're working with a group of people who are not approaching a challenge in the same way and are not looking at an opportunity in the same way. You need that plenary of voices in order to help you really understand the challenge and how to move it forward or to capitalize on the opportunity. And I think that's very fundamental in the Franciscan teaching.
Is your perspective, is kind of a Franciscan perspective of one of communal conversation versus advocacy?
I'm not sure that they're mutually exclusive. I think that communal conversation oftentimes is a necessary first step. I think that helps shape the question, because we're not always asking ourselves the right question. We think this is the question, but the conversation may end up moving that a little bit. But I think that I almost want to call it Franciscan advocacy. There is a way to talk about a subject. There's a way to talk about a question that is inclusive rather than exclusive. And I think that is helpful in working that challenge or problem, because no one likes to feel like their ideas are being dismissed without consideration. Everybody who has taken a seat at the table really wants to be there. We also have to be mindful of who's not at the table, so that's a different conversation. But those people are there because they're interested in whatever this challenge, this opportunity is. And so really understanding how to work with that diverse group helps advance it.
So you got this terrific education at St. Bonaventure and had a Franciscan flavor to it. Prior to that, could be a little more of your biography.
So I was a Girl Scout. I have been involved
Born
with,
where, by the way, born where?
so born in Washington, Pennsylvania. My father was an active member of the Air Force at the time, so he was actually stationed out of the country while my mother was pregnant with me, so she moved home with her parents for that time rather than, I believe they were living at Griffiths Air Force Base at the time, so rather than stay in Rome by herself. We lived in Wheeling, West Virginia for a few years, and then moved to a suburb of Pittsburgh when I was not quite 4, and grew up there. I graduated from high school there, Moon High School, which was in a lovely suburb of Pittsburgh.
Moon Township.
Moon Township,
Right.
indeed, yes. And then shortly after I graduated from high school, we moved to Ellicott City, Maryland.
Okay.
That was a little bit of a rough transition for me. That's a challenging age, I think, to transition to a new place. So when I would come home from college, I didn't know anybody there. So that's also, I think, part of my affinity for St. Bonaventure is that my time away from college got shorter and shorter every year. I would leave later and go back earlier. But I have been involved with nonprofits probably since I was a young teenager, between Key Club and the Girl Scouts. I volunteered at one of the local nursing homes. It has always been something that has been a part of how I operate in the world.
So you're from the Pittsburgh area essentially, and what was the draw for Allegheny, New York?
Well, first of all, it's also called Pop there, which was helpful, so I didn't have to make the soda cola transition. My high school had someone who went to St. Bonaventure maybe every other year, going back a few years. And one of my good friends, her older sister, had gone there, so I had heard about it. One of the attractions for me, honestly, was their study abroad program in Oxford. And I had always wanted to study abroad. I had been an exchange student in high school, and so having this in college as well was important to me. But I think most importantly, it probably comes down to one particular professor, and his name was Doug Carr. And he was a dynamic teacher, but he was someone I had met with during one of my campus tours there. And I'm sure this is not an accurate memory, but my recollection is he called me basically once a week until I made up my mind that I was going to St. Bonaventure. And then even after that point, he had another professor or a student call me every couple of weeks to make sure I was still okay with my decision and that I was still interested in being there. And I thought that a school that took that much interest in me before I was even there could only do wonderful things for me once I was there.
So you are the most recruited St. Bonaventure student since Bob Lanier.
It's possible. No, I think most of the basketball team probably has me outranked, but that's a nice way to phrase it.
Well, we'll go with that. So yeah, you get there. Did you think that there was major that you wanted to get into as the study part?
No, I knew I was going into journalism, so that was
Okay.
that was the school I knew I was going into. I remember talking to Dr. Carr somewhere probably towards the end of my first semester freshman year, and I told him I thought I was maybe going to change my major to biology. And he just stopped for a moment, and he looked at me and he said, okay, no, I think it's a double major because scientists can't write. So you will continue on that path if that's what interests you, but we'll keep you in journalism because you have to help them explain to the world what they're working on. That didn't last very long. I've always loved biology, but the harder sciences were never going to work out for me. Math is not my strong suit. So I did end up double majoring in political science and journalism. And that was an excellent combination. I think, so I started out on the newspaper, sort of morphed into the radio station there. And then most of my extracurricular activities in college were more on the political side. So I was in student government. As a freshman, I was running the Residence Hall Association, which was hilarious. I was the vice president of legislative affairs in student government. And then I lost the election for president going into my senior year. So I worked with the university to create a position for myself.
Did you try to overturn the election?
I did not. I did not try to overturn the election. Nope. I accepted that gracefully. But I couldn't imagine what I was going to do my senior year without being in student government. So I talked to the vice president of student affairs, and we created a position called the student advocate. So if students were going through the disciplinary process, they had someone who sort of appeared that they could talk to, who could explain the rules to them, and that was my role. And also, if a student ever needed to be on a committee at St. Bonaventure, I feel like during my 4 years, I was probably that student. I helped write the sexual harassment policy, I helped write the new core curriculum, and I feel like there was a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that I was also involved in.
Now, I think for the camera, it would be good to explain that St. Bonaventure is almost world-renowned in its journalism. And they have a very prestigious award, which one of our Jamestown folks actually won.
Yep.
So could you talk a little bit about that?
So the Jandoli Award is the award given to both the current student who excels academically, but also shows the most promise in the field of journalism. I knew by the time I was a senior that journalism was unlikely the path I was following, so I was not considered for the award. I did receive some other ones, but so Russ Jandoli was the founder of the School of Journalism. He was the chair of the department and then the school for a very long time. He passed away shortly before I started my academic career there, so unfortunately I never got the chance to meet him. But there are 5 Pulitzer Prize winners who've come out of there, numerous authors, all sorts of, basically the founders of ESPN, a lot of the founding broadcasters and management came out of St. Bonaventure, so it really does have quite the esteemed program.
And one of our Jackson Center interns won it as well.
That is true, Cameron Hurst, as well as one of our board members, Michael Hill.
Michael Hill.
Yep.
And Cameron actually was part of getting some acknowledgement from our NFL Commissioner, Roger Goodell.
Yes.
So it was a real St. Bonaventure moment there. Was Lee Capola part of your world?
He was. He became dean my senior year.
Mm-hmm.
So, we knew each other somewhat, but really got to know each other more after I had graduated.
Yeah. And Lee was, for those who may not know, he was a journalist, dean of the St. Bonaventure Journalism School, but also a participant here on several events, dealing with one of the first guys who covered Attica and the mob in Niagara Falls.
Well, and he was also someone, although I don't think I recognized it so much at the time, hadn't really considered law school after college.
That's right.
And, that was absolutely his path. Not immediately, he was a practicing journalist for a number of years, but that's also part of what started me thinking that might be an interesting path.
Well, we could just segue from there. I mean, at some point, you graduated from St. Bonaventure, and then was there an aha moment saying, I'd like to go to law school?
So my college roommate and close friend was from a family of lawyers, and so she was prepping for the LSATs during the fall of our senior year, and I was helping her study with that, and I had done several years of mock trial. Again, like the political side of thing was really my focus in college after a certain point, and as I was helping her study, and we were going through the logic games and things like that, I was like, well, shoot, I could do this. And so I ended up taking the LSAT prep classes with her and ended up going to law school.
Catholic University.
Mm-hmm.
That's in Washington.
Yep.
And from there, was it logical that you would graduate, you get to pass the bar, and that you would stay in the Washington area? Was that just a normal progression?
I I think in general, wherever someone goes to law school, there's a fairly high likelihood that they stay in that general area to practice. I think that's part of, it's not 100%, but I think that's part of what shapes your career path, also because that's part of what shapes your internship opportunities and where you are exposed in terms of summer work and things like that. I went to law school with the thought that my ultimate goal would be to be the New York Times First Amendment lawyer. Thought that sounded like an interesting way to combine my journalism background and this path. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose the Communications Law Institute there at the time. I believe this is true. At the time, it was the only communications law concentration in the country, that level of it. And when I got there, a lot of the curriculum actually focused on what would have been relatively new technology at the time, but on the FCC side of things. So cellular work. This is after the Bell breakup and the remerging of some of the baby bells, and so working through all of that in the late 90s, early 2000 was interesting to me. So I did a couple of internships at the Federal Communications Commission. I did one with the National Association of Broadcasters, and then I graduated from law school before the FCC made me an offer. Well, the FCC entered a hiring freeze before they made me an offer, so I graduated law school without a job, which was a shock.
But you didn't have any debts, of course.
No, no, actually that's not true, because my parents were afraid that I was going to become a perpetual student. So I did have a full scholarship to St. Bonaventure, but only a partial scholarship to law school. So I did.
Yeah.
My parents wanted to make sure I wasn't going to stay in college forever.
Yep, I get that. Then you went to the law firm of Howry LLP.
Yep,
And it's a big law firm.
it was, yes.
So 500 folks or so?
Yep.
So what was that like? Did you feel like they work you?
Yeah, so yes, there were, and this was also sort of the start of an interesting transition time in the legal field of things stopping being entirely in paper and moving to more electronic. I remember getting my first BlackBerry and thinking, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and about 6 months later thinking this is the worst thing that has ever happened to me, because there was no separation from work and personal. It was, I think every young lawyer has the stories of, I didn't sleep for 3 days because we had to get something done. I found a niche in antitrust work, especially with the government approvals that are required for that, and that's can be nerve-wracking at times, because if you don't submit a document in that initial process that the government leader decides you should have, there are massive fines that can be levied on the client. And so that anxiety sometimes would just keep me up of, had I actually been through everything, had I seen everything, and it was never just me working on this. I can remember teams of 25 attorneys sort of fanning out over a corporation. Some of the mergers I got to work on, though, were really exciting. So when Pepsi bought Quaker Oats, that was something I got to work on. When some ball bearing companies were merging, that was also something I got to work on. I am a font of useless knowledge. So when we'd be driving down the highway with friends, I would point to an 18-wheeler and say, do you know the size of the ball bearings in those tires? And nobody cares about that sort of stuff. But
Well, we do care. SKF cares a big deal about that. So we need to take you down there.
Yep.
Yeah, talk about sizes of ball bearings. So we can see that conversation. Then Verizon. So when my cell phone doesn't activate quickly, I can talk to you about this?
The technology has improved even since I was there. But yes, I am still the chief phone question answerer for the team here as well as for my family. So yes, it's helpful.
Well, aside from that and bats, this is good. Your resume is being built.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Other duties as assigned, and it's good to be versatile.
You kind of worked your way then into the kind of the not-for-profit, the executive search committee, and then executive search firm. This idea of public service, not only does that being taught at St. Bonaventure, but is that something that came from your parents? Were they part of that?
Yeah, I think so. My father was in the military for many years, and then after I was born, he moved into the reserves. My mother was an elementary school teacher and very active in a variety of communities, so I think they led more by example. I don't ever really remember a conversation about that other than being encouraged to participate in things like Key Club and Girl Scouts. But my parents were, I think, and they're still some of my greatest examples for how you do things. But I think they led by example. I think for both my brother and I, service is a core part of who we are.
What's this backstory behind you becoming where you are today, President, Chief Executive Officer of the Robert H. Jackson Center?
Yeah. So I decided to retire from the practice of law at Verizon and volunteered to be RIFed for that, which my boss said to me, you weren't on our list, and I thanked him for that. But that enabled me the luxury of time to really find what it was that would suit me best next. I started working with Vetted Solutions. The gentleman who owns that company was my very first internship boss. He's also a Bonnie. And about a year into my retirement, he emailed me and said, I need someone to help me out for like 4 to 6 weeks. I just have some projects I need to be able to throw to somebody and know that they'll get done. And I was there a little over 2 years. The 4 to 6 weeks, the projects just kept getting extended and more creative and more interesting. But for me, I was trying to figure out, how do I translate a legal resume into a resume that nonprofits understand? I knew nonprofit was the direction I wanted to head. I wasn't sure exactly at what level at that point, but I took a look at where I spent my time and money and realized that my interest fell into sort of three neat buckets. But when I was talking to people who worked for the nonprofits, my resume confused them because they don't need lawyers. And so working for Vetted Solutions really helped me understand the challenges that nonprofits are grappling with, from all sizes, very small to very big, but also how I can speak the language and how I can translate the work I'd done as a lawyer from project management to people management to budget management into language that nonprofits were like, oh, I get this. Okay, I see what's happening. And the Jackson Center was actually only the second job that I applied for. And that was, I remember actually getting a phone call from you, Thanksgiving, the weekend before Thanksgiving in 2018, and you saying, hey, I'm in town. Do you want to meet? And I think we talked on the phone maybe a couple of days before that, and because your son lives there. And so my parents were in town already because my family has always celebrated Thanksgiving early. But and to be honest, I don't think I've ever told you this. I was like, oh God, really? Okay. So I went to where your son was playing, and to my surprise, it was you and your entire family, and then also a Jackson grandchild, which I was not expecting. And so it was also a little bit more of, for me, a thought of, well, this is really serious. This is like a pre-interview almost, and let's see how I come out of this.
How'd you feel you came out of it?
I felt okay. Like I don't think I embarrassed myself. I'm not sure it was my rosiest showing, because I also remember not feeling well at that particular time. In fact, I think I even loosely said, okay, I'm not feeling 100%. But when I submitted my materials about a month later, I did get the call to come up to interview. So I guess I didn't do too shabbily.
Well, again, I guess for the camera, the back story of that was I was not on the search committee, but the chairman of the search committee asked me to reach out to Michael Hill to see if in his orbit there was anybody, and he asked probably half an hour's worth of questions.
He's always been very thorough.
Yeah, very thorough, but never mentioned a name. He goes, I might have somebody, and that's when, I'm sure he reached out to you,
Yep.
saying, would you be interested? Here are a whole lot of things, which then led to, by the way, Michael Hill's a fellow Bonnie, and that led really to the introduction and the whole thing. And again, I don't want to digress too much, but my son was playing, and it was for a camp. We were doing videography, and I was doing more video than, I'm running around doing what I do. And I'm not sure we even talked much, other than, hey, glad you're here, and here's Julia and my wife, and have fun. And that was quite the night. And the rest is history. So you come here, and now it's 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
What's the surprise?
It's the surprise. So I think part of the surprise is how, this is gonna sound strange. The COVID pandemic actually, I think, was very good for me personally here. Because moving here, it's a smaller town. The circles often tend to already be formed, and people are welcoming and they reach out, but only that's usually in a professional capacity. So the opportunity to really go deeper and make friends, because everybody has their own lives and families and their own work, and they're busy. And so the pandemic slowed that all down and broke all of those patterns. And so there's a core group of people who has since expanded, but I would just text them or call them and say, hey, do you want to go for a walk today? Because we could be together outside. And that gave us the opportunity to get to know each other in a way that I think that would have been a lot harder if we hadn't had that slowdown. And so I think one of the things that surprised me, and not so much because it was unexpected, was how deep the friendships are that I have made here. This is an exceptionally welcoming community. I was chuckling just recently when I bought a piece of furniture from one of the local shops, and I thought to myself, I have no idea how I'm getting this to my house. My car is not big enough. I don't own a truck. And that's shortly after we had started construction here and on the renovation of the lobby, and our clerk of the works, he's like, well, just tell me where to meet you. We'll load it in my truck. I'll help you get into the house. And I thought, I don't even know my neighbors' names in Virginia, some of them. Like, this never would have happened there. And I feel like I hear those types of stories all of the time. Friends of mine who come to visit me here also often joke. Some you have met, because I walked into Eckloff's and I was over in a completely different part of the store, and you were in line, and I think must have heard me talking to them, and so you approached a group of friends, and they were just flabbergasted. Afterwards, we came out. They said, "Do you know everybody here?" I said, "No, he's literally the one person in line that I knew." But it is that type of town where everybody sort of knows somebody else. I love the stories here. I chuckle with the team often because most of them are from the area and have been here. So the way they navigate the city is very different than someone who's new, because they'll say, where the old Wendy's was, turn there. And I think, I don't know where the old Wendy's was. So I'm just gonna need a street name, or tell me like how many blocks to go before I have to turn. And so that's always chuckling. But everybody in this town seems to be connected in some way, and that forms a really nice net here.
That's the personal side. From the professional side, where your job description is multifaceted. Obviously, you're the president, CEO, which also, like a college president, is you're out meeting people, you've got to create development, you've got opportunities and challenges to maintain a facility, and a whole lot of things. And that's a 3, maximum 4-person operation.
Yep.
How do you manage that?
I talk really fast. It is, it's sort of, I think on any given day, something gets attention and something doesn't. And that's okay. I'm learning to be better about that, but I also think legal practice prepares you for that, because it is rare that everything is on fire all at once. And here, very few things actually catch on fire, which I appreciate. The team is really wonderful, both physically and metaphorically here. The team is really wonderful. They know they all excel in their roles, and so that is a great support to me. It is, I think, from a professional perspective, the number of bats did come as a surprise. But it is I think the transition to, I remember about, 4 months, I think, after I started here, we had a board gathering, and it was the annual gathering, and we really started strategic planning. And I, for my interview, had been asked to put together a 5-year vision for the center. And we got to that first, or that group strategic planning, and I thought, well, my vision is like crap from the interview in terms of what I thought we could do. And I remember talking to some of the board members and not exactly apologizing, but I was trying to gauge their temperature with this all of this information I had provided to them, and them thinking, oh yeah, we didn't really think that was going to work because you didn't know enough about us at that point. They said, but it was interesting. There are ideas in there that are interesting, and we think we should hold on to that. And so this continuous growth cycle, these continuing capacity conversations that we're having, again, is part of, I think, that surprise for me, because I am a first-time leader in this level of a role. It is, I feel like my most often uttered phrase is, I don't know how to do that, but we'll figure it out. And that's part of what keeps me energized in this role.
Well, one of the things that was thrown at you was that the Jackson Center was the beneficiary of a $1.5 million DIA, which was hard fought to get. We got it. And the amount was a surprising amount for us. But then you got to do it. You got to take that and convert it. And that was your job.
It was. In fact, on day 3, I walked in and someone handed me a hard hat and a shovel. And I thought, what are we doing right now? And it was the photo op, the ceremonial first shovel, and with the mayor out front. And that was certainly, I barely have done construction on my house. So this, leading that process was a really interesting experience. I, again, was very grateful to have the support of David Meisenheimer from Labella, Randy Beckering, who was our clerk of the works. And so I spent a lot of time with both of them saying, I really need you to explain this to me like I am a child, because there are terms being thrown around, and I would just walk around with the plans and be like, okay, what are we doing today, and how does that fit into the overall plans? And we have since also completed a second smaller project on the second floor, and so that initial experience was very helpful in understanding what that second experience could look like.
For the camera, your mission at the Robert H. Jackson Center is a forum for education on and discussion of law and justice issues as guided by the life and work of Robert H. Jackson. Is that a work in progress, the mission? Has that been a statement? I know it's different than way back when, but does that continue to be something you look at?
It does. It is, for me, if the mission doesn't guide the organization, I'm not sure what would, nor do I think the organization would be particularly successful if they stepped away from their mission. That mission is an update and fairly recent, so we worked through a capacity building project. We started on this about a little over 2 years ago, and taking a look at our mission and our vision and our values was one of the initial steps there to make sure that the board and the team here were all in alignment as to what our mission was, how we were articulating it, how did we think it would excite people, and how would it guide our work.
What were the discussions like?
We actually aligned on the general theme pretty easily. As you know, our board has a lot of lawyers on it, so the wordsmithing can sometimes get a little overwhelming. But the general direction of it was agreed on pretty easily.
And you also then, from that mission, you have a vision statement, and I'll read it. Dedicated to the universal principles of fairness, equity, and justice, the center serves as a forum for meaningful dialogue and education on critical topics such as the Supreme Court, international humanitarian law, and civics. I think now is a good time to plug some of the programs that you do here, and how that fits within the vision.
Absolutely. So the student programs are the easiest and I think most renowned of what we do. And so we bring in, I think my favorite part of that is something called Living Voices, and we bring in performance pieces, we're up to 5 at the moment, that introduce topics like the Holocaust, like Japanese internment, like civil rights, suffrage, and immigration. Those are actually all 5 of them, to students starting as young as 3rd grade. We, over the last couple of years, have started opening those up to the public as well. So we have a couple of evening performances of those, which I encourage people to come to. There's one in early March and another in April. And really generates a lot of conversation. It's also one of the programs because Jackson himself was born in Warren County, Pennsylvania, although spent most of his formative years in Western New York. It is one of the best ways for us also to connect with the students in Warren County. They love these programs, and so bring their students up for each of them. We also, in the past, have done young.
On the Living Voices, I mean, are uniquely produced and presented. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because it is it's not only interactive, but it has live act.
Yeah, so the actors and actresses in Living Voices interact with both audio and video. And so we use the screen that's behind the curtain here to show the video, and the audio obviously just happens with that. And they have oftentimes props and things like that. And so for each of them, they're typically telling the story of usually a teenage person, sometimes growing into adulthood, but other times not, depending on what the particular story is. And each of the actors and actresses are also really good at involving the audience in the conversation. So they each start with a little bit of historic or ground setting to make sure everybody's has the same background or the necessary background going into the piece. And then after the piece, they spend a fair amount of time answering audience questions. And so really opening it up to the students and the teachers and the public. We just did the suffrage program last week, and one of the topics of conversation, because it was focused on women's suffrage, that amendment actually the 19th Amendment took about 72 years to actually get to passage. And the performer always likes to tell the students it doesn't have to be that long. So during the Vietnam War, when the voting age was still 21 and the movement started to lower the voting age to 18, that process took 9 months. And there was a woman in the audience who had been part of that from the local area, and so she shared some of her story on that. And I think for the students also having the sense of, wow, there are people who are alive who experience this and can talk about it is one eye-opening thing, but also understanding how close in time some of this still really is. And so we hear often from the students and the curriculum coordinators that how impactful this is for the students. They talk about it on the bus, it comes up in class for the next several weeks. A lot of the students at this point have been repeat attendees here, depending on what the subject is. And so it's nice to hear them say, oh, I remember this place. I love this performance. And so that's always really great.
Outside of the children's, some of these educational things, what else do we do?
So, I have, in my time here, I've tried to focus on a particular theme each year to give our adult programs a little bit of a construct so people understand what the focus is each year. And so I think I would put this into two sort of buckets. One, there's the international humanitarian bucket. And for that, especially for the last couple of years, we've really been focusing the conversation on Ukraine and what the possible paths forward are for justice there. We host and continue to be a co-host of the International Humanitarian Law Roundtable, which tends to be held towards the end of August. Fluctuates a little bit sometimes, depending on what anniversaries are going on. But it is the only gathering really of its kind in the world where the prosecutors and those involved in international humanitarian law actively have the opportunity to come together to, first of all, relax a little bit and be casual, but also just to have those kinds of conversations that really only happen in informal settings. And so it is structured as a roundtable now because it invites conversation with the law students who attend and with the various professors and with the practitioners. And the idea really is to make sure that we are now asking ourselves the right questions and trying to determine what it is we need to understand in order to move toward solution, and less about trying to solve the problems right then and there, because these problems are enormous and it's unlikely that they're going to be solved one weekend in August. The other bucket would be the themed program. So our theme for this year is civic participation. And so I try to invite people both in person and virtually, who can speak to whatever that is. And so coming up in just a little over 2 weeks, I guess, or not quite 2 weeks, is our Jackson Day in Warren. And we tend to do that typically around Jackson's birthday, which is February 13th. But that gets sometimes a little kerfuffled with Valentine's Day, so we moved it this year to February 21st. And we're having Elizabeth Hers, who's the district attorney in Erie County, Pennsylvania, as our speaker. She's the first female district attorney in Erie County. She grew up locally in Falconer, and so that brings a nice tie. That's a rare tie for us in terms of our speaker for that. But she's been engaged in civic work for almost her entire career, and so that's what she's going to talk about. And we invite students, we invite college students, we invite the public at large, and it is both in person and, since the pandemic, zoomed out, so that also increases the participation of people and the ability for people to ask their questions.
We do things at Chautauqua.
We do things at Chautauqua. So we have our key mark lecture, which is the Robert H. Jackson Lecture on the United States Supreme Court. I think I got that right. It might be on the Supreme Court of the United States. But that happens every summer. It is typically the idea for the speaker comes from what is the court considering in that particular term, and who is the likely expert on that, or someone who can speak on that. And Professor John Barrett is instrumental in guiding me through that, since that is his world. And really, those conversations, we bring our interns to them, you bring your summer students to your summer law students to that as well. And it opens up really such an interesting perspective on the court, because it is not the typical pundit talking about something. It's typically not someone from the press, although we've had a few of those as well. It is usually either a practitioner or a law professor who is really giving their opinion on what is likely to happen and what that might mean for jurisprudence in the United States. And then this past year we also did, and we've done this in the past as well, offered some courses at the institution to provide greater understanding. Last year we did it on voting rights. In the past we've done it on the international humanitarian law. And so that gives us a way to continue our education, which I always like to say is at the heart of everything we do.
And part of that is you bring in, certainly in the summer, groups of interns. And could you explain how that process works? And maybe you reflect on some of the benefits that have happened from them.
Yep, so typically each summer we have about 5 students, typically college students, although this past summer we had a law student as well, and we had someone who just completed her master's work. And so we have an idea of the projects that we're going to need interns to work on during the summer. And so really looking for, when we put out the call for applications, try to give some guidance on what we think they'll be working on that summer. We, of course, think that one of the best benefits is coming to Jamestown to learn about Robert H. Jackson in person here, and to spend time in this community, to have access to the opportunities at Chautauqua. We also take them now to Washington, D.C. for a week and spend time there. And we've only done that for the last 2 summers, but I've tried each summer to gauge who we meet with based on the interests of the students. So it hasn't been exactly the same both summers. The meeting with the head of the Supreme Court Historical Society is always on the list. Taking them to something at the Kennedy Center or the Shakespeare Theater or something just to give them an artistic perspective is always fun. Even movies on the mall, so I leave it up to them by democratic choice. Also try to find some fun food for them to experience. So, if they've never had sushi, let's find a sushi restaurant. This past summer, one of our interns had worked with the Peace Corps in Kazakhstan, and she couldn't find a Kazakh restaurant there, but we did find something relatively close. So we all traipsed down there and sat outside on a picnic table and ate that food, which was delicious. It is, I hope, a really great experience for them, both from a collegiality amongst their peers, Also, I've seen the mentor relationships develop between the older interns and the younger interns. 2 summers ago, one of our interns started working on a project here. She started writing a paper that just in the last month was actually published. So it's a white paper talking about how the way that sexual crimes in the international world are viewed and prosecuted does some disservice, because crimes against women and children can't always be captured under the label of sexual violence. And so she spent 2 years writing, researching, working on this. David Crane was also instrumental in that. At the same time, while she is studying abroad, because she's working on her Arabic skills, and she wants to, because that is the path that she thinks she wants to go. So this past summer we had a Russian national who had just completed her master's in work in Russian and English interpretation. So she spent time with the Russian opening statement and comparing the audio to the actual transcript and making sure, creating an English interpretation of that as well, and then also noting for us, at least in her opinion, where the audio differs from the written. As we all know, the written transcript, especially the opening statements, differs from what was actually delivered from the podiums, because it had to be submitted in advance. And so those are fun resources for us to have. I think all of our interns are extraordinary. That is one of the most fun things I do is talk to them and work with them and help them on their path. And I hope they consider themselves always a part of our family. We check in with them pretty regularly. We are here to encourage them. I write a lot of letters of recommendation for grad school or law school, and that's I really love that part.
So what's the process? How do you recruit them?
So we advertise everywhere we can think of. There is a communal, I guess it's a platform that a lot of colleges use called Handshake, and so anyone who wants to advertise a job or an internship opportunity can put it on Handshake. We also put it on, obviously, our Facebook page, on our website, on our LinkedIn profiles. We talk to previous interns and ask them to share the word. We've got some professors that we've worked with who often try to send us candidates, and so always make sure that they're in the loop. And we typically open up the application process in early December and then close it. We'll close it at the end of February. And so that gives me March to review resumes and talk to the interns and make the selections. I like to actually speak with as many of them as I can, because that also gives me a sense of how can we help them. It also gives me a sense of how they might, as I'm trying to put together the cohort, how they might mix with the other people in consideration, which that dynamic is always important. And we ask them to provide their resume, often a written statement, so I can get a sense of how they write, and really trying to understand why are they interested in Robert H. Jackson, and from their internship, what are they hoping to gain from it?
Now that you are 5 years, almost 5 years into this, among the many documents that one can pick up is called Opening Doors, the Case for Investment, which is really an opportunity to leverage those assets which have occurred been created over the last many years. And I'll give you an opportunity maybe to talk a little bit about it. You have the organizational and programmatic investments. What's that?
So the genesis of this actually came from the capacity building work that we have been doing over the last few years. And during the capacity initial stages, we came up with what we call the 5 pillars. So we think there are 5 areas of the center where we really see having the biggest impact and enabling our growth and our greater reach of Jackson's principles and message. And so those are the building, our organization itself, our programming, our technology, and our development. And so from an organization programmatic perspective, one of our significant focuses is on growing our staff. And so we have been approximately 3 to 4 people for at least as long as I know, and really are at the point, especially on the program side, where while I have a lot of fun doing it, I'm not an expert at it, and given all of the other things that I have on my plate, doesn't always get my full attention. And it's we're at the point in our growth where we need someone who this is their primary focus. And so we have been in the market for a director of programs for a few months now. I'm really trying to find someone who has that program development experience, background hopefully in history or law or something like that, that can really help us take our, what I think are really great programs already, but really raise them to the next level. Similarly, from an organization perspective, making sure that our board has the resources that it needs in terms of their growth and development, and that we are recruiting people to our board of continuing experience to help shape how we do what we do. On the technology side, which I think is something very exciting, I remember during my interview telling the search committee that the center's website was terrible, and it is. And it has been my website now for 5 years, so I have to do something about it. And so we actually just a couple weeks ago kicked off that process. I don't know how many of you have gone through a website revamp. It is not cheap. All told, that'll cost close to $100,000 for us to really, and that's really just the start of it, because for us, we also want our website to be the one-stop shop for everything Jackson. And so that means digitizing a lot of Jackson that's out there that we do not have. And most of his archives and documents have not been digitized. So that's a continuing that. I feel like adding things to the website will be a perpetual project probably for the next decade, but we need to get the bones of the website up in a way that is informative, that is visually appealing, that looks like websites today should look, and really enables good searches, access to our archives, access to our programs, access to our exhibits in a way that hopefully entices people to also come here, but gives them the flavor of what we do if they're not able to. We're very excited about that. I'm very excited about the website.
Facility-wise,
So our building is gorgeous, and it is one of the oldest homes in Jamestown. It's the oldest brick home here in the city. There are parts of it that we know we need to do some work. So this theater that we are sitting in is something that we are hoping to just bring into the 21st century, from lighting, from more eco-friendly lights and audio and the way the AV works in here, to make it more appealing for I guess I would call it a burgeoning arts, and certainly, and that by no means do I mean there hasn't been an arts community here for a very long time, but it feels like it's growing. And so really trying to turn this theater into a place that is more accessible, as well as can work with a wider variety of artistic performances. The carpet on the floor somewhat inhibits dance, so it also plays with the acoustics in here. And so we are mindful of how the community is using this space and how can we make it better for them to use.
so you've got the physical facility, and then specifically you've talked about the theater, and I know we've done an awful lot over here. Is there any plans for anything there outside of the theater, or is this the principal focus?
I mean, this is the principal focus for the moment, but I am mindful as we are growing our staff, where are we housing them? So as part of the renovation, the DRI renovation, there used to be an apartment in this building for people who don't know, and so that cobbled up some of the apartment space, but there still are a couple rooms left that could very easily be turned into offices. And so that's probably the next phase in terms of the mansion side of the building and the rehab that is necessary there. I am always mindful of accessibility here, and so how people who are not as mobile as others can access this space is important to me. Also, we don't have a whole lot of signage at this point in terms of if you have visual impairments or hearing impairments. We don't have a lot that augments the experience. And so other things from a technology perspective, and I guess sort of a quasi-technology building perspective, is how we can adjust our space to bring in more technology. So that would enable teachers potentially to use a smart board for their lesson plans and to hook into the great depth of video recordings that we have and the video archives that they could use to help teach their students. But also just in general for if you are here for a particular program or you're here for a particular exhibit, we have an awful lot of audio that could augment a lot of what we do here, audio and video, and that's not readily accessible. And so really being mindful of how are we using the building to tell Jackson's story. It is something we are teeing up for 2025 is really a relook and a revamp, at least the start of a revamp of the exhibits, all of the exhibits we have here. And that a lot of them haven't been refreshed in a while, so being mindful of how are we enticing previous visitors also back into this space, but really how are we using the structure to tell what is, I think, one of the greatest stories of an individual that ever lived.
When you were in law school, did Jackson mean anything to you?
No, I mean, I was aware of some of his opinions. I probably have in my note cards that Jackson was the writer of a particular opinion. I don't recall being particularly awed by his writing at the time, but that my focus in law school was how much information can I cram into my brain, and how can I provide it to the professor in a way that shows, like, I'm not just regurgitating information, but I actually understood the principles and how they could apply today. I think more when I started practicing antitrust law, that's not something I studied in law school, and so I wasn't really aware of his impact on reviving antitrust litigation. And so reading some of his speeches from that time frame and how he was really thinking about antitrust work was inspirational.
In your newsletter, most recently, you conclude, our successes are your successes. We appreciate your investment in our programs, your supportive activities, and your interest in Robert H. Jackson's continuing legacy today. We look forward to continuing our partnership with you in this work. With thanks, Kristan McMahon. So you pick up this envelope here,
Yes.
and you're looking at the crowd. What would you tell them of why they should continue their appreciation of their investment, which they no doubt will make probably by the end of tonight?
That was a very nice sell there, Greg. Thank you. I appreciate that. In case anybody's uncertain as to what the envelope looks like, here it is. It is, I am mindful that I am helping to lead the current team to showcase this legacy and its continuing relevance. I think I have said numerous times that I am at times quite gratified by how much of Jackson's work and words and inspiration are still relevant today, and at times how much that frustrates me, how much we haven't moved on since his era, how much of those same challenges we keep repeating. And while I take great comfort in his guidance, I really want the center to be leading the charge into how do we move past this. I think it's every nonprofit's goal to make their mission obsolete. And given our current political climate and given the state of the world, I don't think that is going to happen for the Jackson Center anytime soon. But I'm mindful that this isn't my legacy. This is Bob Jackson's legacy, and I'm not the only person contributing to it, because everybody who has a question, everybody who has an idea that fits into this, everybody who comes to a program or to the center's website or talks to their students or talks to their children about these issues is part of the work that we're doing, and that means a lot to me. And so that's why an investment in the Robert H. Jackson Center continues to be worthwhile.
You're not leaving. Lock the doors. Obviously, you knew I was going to be interviewing you, and you know the last question is, what's the question I haven't asked you that you were preparing for and haven't had the opportunity to talk about?
I actually expected there to be more sports questions involved. I feel like I'm one of the few that you haven't asked a sports question
I
of.
mean, about the fact that the highlight of every intern is going to the Tarpsco's game?
Yes, I did, yes, I forgot to mention that that's part of the community experience
Washington
here.
DC,
Yes.
okay, but Tarpsco game.
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, we've never been able to go to a Nats game while we've been in DC. They tend to be on a break at that point. But, yeah, I think I was a little surprised there was no sports.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to talk about sports? You want to talk about Bonaventure basketball? Do you want to talk
I'm
about
always
legacy?
happy to talk about the Bonnies, but I also think we can save that for another time.
Another day,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I got to tell you, this has been wonderful. I've actually learned a lot about you tonight that I didn't know. And I guess that's part of why I do what I do, and you are incredibly insightful. And I think, as I said that's why I showed that opening clip, that we are in good hands with the hire we did 5 years ago. And I think I repeat that today in 2024. So thank you for being President, CEO and thank you for letting us have an opportunity to get to know you better.
Thank you. It was nice to be here.
Okay. Kristan McMahon.